The quarterfinals of 2024 Worlds is about to kick off, and I think it's really important to take a step back and look at the very obvious fact of, for the second year in a row, no EU teams have made the quarterfinals. This effectively brings EU to probably its lowest point in history. I don't think I've ever seen the fans as despondent to their region as I ever have before. Yes, there's been kind of lower points, 2014, some unlucky scenarios where the Team Alliance lost to the Brazilian team Kaboom, and then Fnatic had that famous one hit from the Nexus away game that pretty much caused both teams to not get out of groups. But I think if you look at both years, it's quite obvious that the teams of EU somewhat don't always deserve to be out in quarterfinals and just aren't good enough. Yes, G2 you could easily say should have been in quarterfinals. They played pretty well, especially in the BLG series, was very close at the very end and just got some unlucky draws. Unfortunately, that's kind of what happens with the Swiss stage. It's pretty much how FlyQuest got out, even though G2's looked like the better team. But Fnatic relatively struggled the entire time. And certainly haven't looked good enough to be a second place team. And then the Mad Lions team, which really shouldn't have been at Worlds in the first place, but also kind of shows the low level of the region now, lost to the Vietnamese team, which just in terms of the resources and the fact that most of the Vietnam region was ripped apart due to a max fixing scandal, the fact that they lost a best of 3 there is a pretty low point. Now, I find it quite sad that the European teams aren't doing as well as they were before. You should certainly want the European teams to do well. We'll kind of talk about that later. But EU League of Legends is probably the 3rd best region of all time. Taiwan has one more trophy, but I don't think they've had the consistency at high level, or at least one more Worlds trophy, the consistency at high level as the EU teams had. And some of the EU teams have been the best in the world. You obviously have G2 in 2019, and then you have Moscow 5 in 2012 as well, both revolutionizing the meta, playing actually both very strange and different ways. Moscow 5 just kind of playing like psychopaths, because they were. Maybe I'll do a video about it on that sometime, because that's a whole can of worms. And then G2 obviously having Perts switch to ADC and kind of having to adapt around there, playing things that you usually wouldn't see bot lane, and then kind of reshaping the meta from their way. But nobody really doing it as well as them, except for you can maybe argue FPX there, but again, that's another argument. And a lot of teams have made the World Finals. You had Fnatic in 2018, and G2 went into 2019 Worlds as favorites. And I think even people forget that there was a lot of hype around them in the 2020 Worlds as well. People thought that there was kind of going to be a repeat of what had happened. We hadn't really seen them play at the international level because MSI hadn't happened that year because of COVID. And then people didn't really know how the Korean teams were going to be. So people actually were excited for them to play against Damwon, but it didn't go well, unfortunately, because that Damwon team was kind of maybe not the golden child, but that team was kind of destined to win Worlds that year. They were just really too good to be stopped, and it was too hard for anyone. Anyway, since 2020, I don't really think that there's been a team that has had any hope of potentially winning the World Championship. You have Mad Lions in 2021, who were the top team, who lucked their way kind of into groups, and then you really only had G2 performing at the World Championship since then, and it's absolutely only gotten worse. I think it's very bad, not only for if you're an enjoyer of the game, and you enjoy the storylines like myself, and you like there to be multiple different regions competing, but I think Riot really needs to be worried, because as the EU teams get worse, and I'll kind of talk about this a little bit later, as the kind of negativity from both the fans and the players grows to the EU teams, kind of similar to how it kind of festered and fostered over time with NA, where the NA became such a, just, how do you even describe it? It was just, so negative that, everyone thought the region was a joke, even though for a while they were the 4th or 5th best region, and there was still a chance for them to grow. But I think negativity over time and lack of effort from the players really sunk that region. I fear a lot could happen with EU as well. And if that happens with EU, League of Legends Esports is going to be in a really tough place. People like to watch their favorite EU and NA teams, especially in EU, where the viewership is much higher because there's still a much bigger player base than in North America. But I think we can fix this issue, and I think it's important for League of Legends esports to survive, not just stay big, and it's obviously, and it's one of its lowest points from a Western viewership, but certainly regain its Western viewership, which Riot, I think, really crucially needs. I think we can get back to that point, but we got to talk about a couple things. Got to talk about how these teams got to this point, how both the players and orgs have kind of made the region and the teams themselves worse over the few years. We're going to talk about how EU is the region of the West that has the most chance to succeed. They're obviously the ones that have gotten the closest of any other Western region, and why they need to be the one focused as well. Why the players and the fans have done a really bad job in terms of encouraging their teams and just kind of fostering a area of negativity as they've done with NA that's going to be nothing but helpful, or excuse me, nothing but unhelpful to these players and these teams succeeding. And I want to end it off on an encouraging note. So we got to talk about what you as a fan can do to help encourage these teams, because I don't think it's not only important to be critical of your favorite EU teams while they're not performing well, it's important for that to not foster into full-on negativity where it ends up just becoming hate for the sake of hate because the teams aren't good enough. Now we're going to start with the problems of LEC, which I think one of the major ones has to be the GMing of these teams. The way to make a region, I think, really successful, there's only so many players who have, ultimate talent. You really want to make it so that, the top 3, top 4 teams are really competitive with each other. I think that's really important because you get teams that are really high level. It not only lets a level of play get better, but it encourages both not both teams, all 4 teams to consistently get better, try to compete with each other, have wins come back and forth. Nowadays it's just G2 who's really the only team that has a relatively cohesive 5-man lineup, just winning the championships for the last few years. And we can also talk about how I think that's disencouraged some of the players. But the fact that we got to the point where only G2 has a cohesive lineup is pretty crazy. You have so many different scenarios where players who are really good are just elo held on bad teams. Yankos has been like that for a year now. Larson feels like it's been like 3 years since he's been elo held. He's been elo held for most of his career, but it's really only been the last 2 splits he's been like that. Patrick has had pretty much his whole time being on worse teams, even though he's actually put up pretty good numbers in the LEC. Upset always, seems to be on a top team for a little bit and then, ends up on the bottom somehow. There's these players with insane skill that just seem to be kind of getting thrown aside. We're not really building the best team. And I know super teams don't always work, but you can still build a really good team that has, at least players who are top 4 in their role. But it doesn't seem like any, except for G2, that any team, maybe Fnatic this season, but as you saw from their macro play, that they're still really not good enough. And I really don't think Humanoid is a good enough player. And maybe not any. He had his moments. I don't think Humanoid's a good enough player, period. But all these teams just seem to be scattered all over the place. And there's even players being left on the side. Crownshot or Crowny, was a very good ADC and then seemed to get nothing after a while. People, I don't like this person, and he's kind of become more of a shithead as he goes on. But Nemesis absolutely was a decent enough player to be on a top 3, top 4 team. He kind of threw his own career aside, but I think that also is an important part of us, players being a little bit difficult and coaches / GMs not wanting to work enough, not wanting to have the structure enough to get them in line. Selfmade is another great example. And then you also have EU players fucking off to NA. Inspired is the best example. He is probably the best jungler in the West. Right? No, he's not even. No. Yeah, I would say Inspired is the best jungler in the West. Razor can, I think, be argued at times, but he is easily the best one. And he's going to be in NA probably for the next couple of years. He's getting a decent paycheck. He's obviously winning championships. He won 1. That gets him to Worlds, which is what he wants, and he's going to get his NA residency. Losing him as a player is very bad for the region. And I think the players have a lot of blame for it too. I don't think they really want to be on the best teams in the world. I don't think they want to make the best teams in the world. So many of them are used to the fact that G2 wins all the time. If you get top 2, top 3, you're able to make it to Worlds. People are so stuck in the rut now of, well, our region sucks. We can't even make it out of quarters. Why even, I think, put in the effort? I think that's a general problem with Western players as well. We're not able to work. I say we're like I'm a Western player. I don't know why I said that. They're not able to work with people that they're not happy with. The idea of winning at all costs, working to do that at all costs, I don't think is as important as being friends with people. I think it's really important to have camaraderie with your teammates, but there's so many times when bad and poor teammates people have not been willing to work with, either from a coaching standpoint or a player standpoint. And I think players really should, if they're kind of comfortable, happy with their paychecks, want their teams to be better, because if their teams are better and they're able to make world finals or even win worlds one times, not only I think will the game get more players, I think the game will get more pro players. Not only will Riot's viewership and potential structure of the LEC be and international terms in general be able to grow, but that will potentially, if we get the business sense right, instead of esports being a pretty much a easy way to make a scam like crypto, instead of actually being a structured business, the players can actually make more money, which seems like some of them want, but not everyone wants to work extremely hard to make the most money. They want to work to make good money, which the metric doesn't really fit there. But as we know, we're putting money, esports money, into places where it shouldn't be, especially paying players too much. And that's a whole nother discussion. And in my opinion, there's very little argument to say the fact that both the coaches and the players don't want to succeed well enough and just want to be better than the other EU teams. In an interview with Thorin on the Best Damn League show, former coach Youngbuck, which many people may only know as the coach of Excel, the last from 2013, I think, 2019 to 2013. But importantly, the coach of Fnatic and the coach of G2 early on, the coach of G2 before Grabs got there, when both of his iterations of Fnatic and G2 were able to make Worlds. He said that he would cheer when other EU teams didn't go well. The players would cheer when other EU teams didn't do well at Worlds or there. They wanted to see them fail. I don't think that's a good thing. You should absolutely have competitive spirit, want to be better than the other teams, but you shouldn't want your competition to fail. Your competition is, especially in League of Legends regions, when we're region locked and we can't consistently play against the Eastern teams, the best teams, so we just have to play with each other, and the region itself has to be strong. You shouldn't want your other teams to fail, because you just want them to be as bad as you can and just you to be good, and not actually want to get better. You need your other teams to push you to be competitive, which is why I talked about there needing to be 3 or 4 teams with all the best players on it to be competitive. You need to be pushed as a player. You can't just be happy with the fact that you're good enough. A lot of the teams, I think, are happy because they're good enough and still able to make Worlds. But the true essence of being a competitor is wanting to be the best. Growth can't happen in a competitive industry if everyone just kind of sits down and is okay being just good enough. I think even the top team of G2 has a lot to be blamed, to not try to push themselves to be more, because they're already going to Worlds. They don't really, probably feel the need to super over exceed the level of their region. And let's be honest, the last split, they weren't very clearly the best team. A lot of the teams, I think, just fall under this, where they're just fine being good enough. A lot of players are fine just being good enough. It's what Taryn Fletcher said in Whiplash. The absolute worst words in the English language are good enough. You can't be happy with good enough. Now, after my more passionate rant about kind of the disappointment of the EU players, you may ask, why so passionate about this region being successful? Why can't we have NA be the best region in the West, or why can't it be Brazil? Well, these are stupid questions to be asking, but we're still going to answer them anyway. EU is obviously the region that has gotten the closest, but at the same time, I think they have the resources. They still have a very large player base, obviously still have a very large percentage of the population who watch it. You still have lots of new players coming in, but I think that even though it's a bit weaker right now, their mentality is still far beyond the mentality of NA. NA is the ultimate region of doesn't need to be good enough. Just get the money, just play. And if you disagree with that, I think that's, you haven't been watching League. You absolutely watch NA play right now where they have no understanding of macro, and I don't think want to have any understanding of macro, especially when at times some of those teams have been some of the more funded ones. They clearly, especially these teams, have very little idea of how to play the map effectively. And the players, I think, are too cocky for their own right and would rather play from themselves and have them be the star rather than all playing together like EU players. EU also still shows some level of, accessible pro play. G2 still has a pretty good macro and pretty good players. People go crazy about the whole NA over EU thing, and it's going to be yapped about a lot because an EU team didn't make Worlds Quarterfinals, where an NA team did. By the way, that NA team, first of all, it's an NA team with 3 European players. I'd still say it's an NA team because of, the work ethic over there and the money and the all the things that are kind of wrong with the NA region, especially it being Los Angeles. And the fact that FlyQuest had a much easier bracket. I mean, they had to beat their other NA team to get into quarterfinals, where G2 beat, or almost had to beat, the number 1 Chinese team. And the number 1 Chinese team was quite weaker, but they still got very close in doing so. I would really hope that nobody actually thinks that NA is a better region than EU. But one of the key things that I think will not help any Western team, let alone EU, NA, whoever the hell you want or delusionally think can be a great team, the thing that I think will absolutely hurt them the most is how people talk about the teams. Not just fans, but people in the industry. For EU, the whole NA over EU thing, if you really want your team to be better, has to be put to bed. We obviously like it because, what Western team is better? But if you're EU casters, if you're EU players, if you truly want your team to be better, you need to be saying, EU, better than this, China, EU better than Korea. People say it jokingly when like one win happens, but people really need to be saying, honestly, people need to have more. It's hard to say. Like, I don't want it to be full-on delusion to think that the EU teams are good enough right now to beat the Chinese or the Korean teams, but I think people need to at least have more encouragement in terms of like, okay, EU teams have been able to beat, like Korean and Chinese teams before. Can we get back to that level? Don't just be happy the fact that you're over NA. NA is a different story, but EU people shouldn't be happy. Oh, we're better than NA. Okay, congratulations. You're better than a region that is in no way a top region. Okay, FlyQuest, okay team. Liquid has shit macro, but, has decent enough players. Everybody else is unbelievably shit in that region. If you're happy about being better than NA, then I don't know what could, like, anything could make you happy. You should be happy the fact that, you're able to do simple tasks at the end. If you're truly wanting a region to be great, you can't just be happy about being better than a shit region. Don't necessarily be delusional, then thinking that you can be better than these Asian teams right off the bat, but know that, hey, there is parts of the European teams that have been able to make Worlds Finals, have been able to compete with the Korean teams. Can we find that again? Can we be that good again? The negativity of the fans is never going to help. Fans unfortunately swing between negativity and hatred for, either if their team misperforms or any other team that they happen to lose against, or just blind faith to, almost, like you're divinely worshiping your team and you believe that there is some divine right that they must win, and confused why it doesn't happen. People don't actually, the fans don't actually analyze and look at things. I think it's important for people, the broadcasters, other talent who talk about the game, and the players to just ignore the fans and, work on critically looking at the problems of their teams, talking about it, understanding that the teams might not be good enough, but I think it's always important to put a spin on how we can be better. this whole thing doesn't work if, for a couple of reasons. The reason that EU needs to be a better region is for, obviously not just for the viewership, but for all of us watching, wanting a Western team to be better. But I also just think that EU needs to have a place in League of Legends, deserves a place in League of Legends, and it's just important for the history of the game. I mean, look at the other two biggest. I'll talk about three big esports. You talk about the shirt I'm wearing. We talk about OGs. Pretty much being, the most famous EU team to win probably anything in international or in any esports, just from the way they did it. There's probably been better EU teams in Dota, but they're at least the most famous one, and people obviously have such a connection with that team winning. Counter-Strike has been dominated by EU teams the entire time. The East really hasn't had as much focus in that. And then it was always a big deal back in the day, and StarCraft 1 especially, but certainly StarCraft 2 as well, where an EU player would do well, and that would give everyone energy and hope that they could be good. I forgot the name of that that guy who used to play for Liquid. Snoot, I think his name was. I don't actually remember, but it was a guy who could compete with Koreans. And then obviously Naniwa was an excellent player. I mean, he was able to win some of those tournaments in both StarCraft 1 and 2. The real bottom line is that if EU doesn't stay, or at least some level of competitive, or get back to a very a level of competitiveness with the Chinese and Korean teams, where it almost looks like that they can potentially make some kind of miracle run, where miracles are not going to be possible if people don't believe that they can make the miracles happen. Until then, I think the ecosystem of League of Legends is just going to get worse. I think same with NA, where the player base will diminish. They feel like people feel like they can't go pro, and you'll get less talent coming in. You'll get less competition in the lower leagues, so it might be easier for worse people to get into the higher leagues and then just not want to work hard enough because they're already in the LEC, and then that just fosters more complacency like the NA region has. I put in this video on a message of hope at the end of the day. I believe that EU can get back to this. I think the GMing of the teams, they need to just shut up and realize that, okay, if we want to make EU the best region, they got to all come together and say, we got to be, we got to be like the Premier League. You got to be the teams over here who are okay being the bottom teams, and you got to have the teams that are okay being, or not okay, but happy being the top teams, and the teams that foster all of the talent in the game. Because you get a few teams that have a high level of play, they're just going to consistently make each other better, and then the level of play not only will rise for them, but the bottom teams are going to actually want to catch up with them, because there's a much larger wall in front of them, making them top four. People who actually do want to win are going to work harder to get to that high level, and then the just general play of the region is going to get much higher. The GM's got to do that, and then the players got to do a couple things. I think they got to work harder. Many of them need to just stay off Twitter, be happy with the fact that not being social media stars, which, I think is certainly a problem. People just care about the fame more than the actual play. And in my opinion, why even be a competitive player in that sense? They also just got to be able to work with each other more. They got to be understanding of like, okay, if we want the EU region to be better, and we're competitive players, we should want the region to be as strong as possible. We shouldn't just be happy playing against NA teams. I think it's bad for both the players and the anyone, the fans, the casters, being happy. Like, yes, G2 got drawn against a really bad team. Why are you happy that your team gets drawn against a really bad team? That's not good enough. If you really want your team to prove themselves, you really want your team to be great, you should be happy with them playing against better teams. Maybe now because the teams aren't good enough, but eventually you should want your teams to be playing against the best teams and winning against the best teams. And you watching this video, I hope you're out there watching this video, you just a normal fan or an amateur player or an amateur coach like me, anyone like that, you can do more to encourage the teams as well. I think a lot of the analysis league channels, stuff like Last Free Nation, is very critical of EU, but still absolutely, gives props to the great players that they are, and certainly criticizes them as well. I think there needs to be more, more things like that, where there's not just blind faith towards the EU teams like something like Euphoria, but actual analysis there. But I think that you as a player just, should be encouraging but still critical of the team. Be like, yes, I love you as a player, but I think you got to, be doing this a bit more, doing this a bit more. Always put a spin on it, you know, for them to be better. That's what I tell my players as a coach, is that no matter, something being good or something being bad, always try to put the spin on what can I do to be better. Be critical, but still, how do I get better? Say, be appreciative of how good you are at the moment, but always try to look to be even better. Tell these things to these players. Overall, create a more, an atmosphere that is allowed to be critical of the teams, but obviously still supportive of them. I think truly, if we get to that state, there is still plenty of talent in the LEC, from the GMing, from the players wanting to work harder, from the fans wanting the players to be better. If we just get all that, I have hope that in a couple of years, at least one EU team can be able to break from the mold, potentially make a deep run like G2 did in 2019, and earn the deep run like G2 did in 2019, and not just get bad teams, but kind of like Fnatic in 2018, but truly be good enough as a top team of League of Legends, where they have a chance to win Worlds. If an EU team wins Worlds, League of Legends esports, and I think the League of Legends game in general, the people who play it, whatever region you're from, becomes so different, and the game might even see new life than it's never seen before, because it'll be a story that people would tell forever.